Sam, Steve, and Claudia are the co-founders of what we now know as Google Docs, although when they started it, they called it Writely. And it was quite a sensation when it came out in 2005. And it really struck me as worth talking to them today, because I think we're at a moment like that one. Back in 2005, there was this problem that everybody had been seeing and wrestling with and complaining about for years. And then along these people came and they saw a way to solve it with the technology that was available. Now, that technology had been available for a few years, but all the pieces weren't quite there. And then it suddenly clicked. And I think we're facing the same situation with AI, where we're going to be thinking through new kinds of problems and looking at the possibilities. And so there's a lot to learn from their experience. Anyway, but a bit more about them. Sam Schillace is now the deputy CTO at Microsoft, and he has a wonderful Substack called Sunday Letters. Steve Newman founded the Golden Gate Institute for AI, which is a really great organization tackling the hard problems in AI. And they run an annual conference called The Curve. I'm really looking forward to attending it next month. And Claudia is happily retired, no longer programming, but instead just living out the dream life of being a dungeon master. Anyway, I think retirement is a stage we will all ideally reach one day, although so far AI seems to be creating more work for us, not less. Anyway, since it's the 20th anniversary of what they created, I reached out to former Google VP Jeff Huber, who was the executive sponsor of the acquisition, to set the stage for us. And we have some recorded comments from him before we start the actual interview. So let's roll with Jeff.
First, congratulations, Sam, Claudia, and Steve on the 20th anniversary of Writely. For a quick intro, I'm Jeff Huber. I was an engineering VP at Google for Google Ads and Apps, and later Maps, and was a sponsor for Google's acquisition and integration of Writely, and for development of Google Docs and Google's suite of communication and collaboration apps. To set the stage a bit, let's think back to 2005, when Writely was born. In pop culture, Brad and Angelina had just become a thing, and My Humps was playing probably far too frequently on your iPod music player, the one with the spinny wheel for navigation. In technology, you were probably using a Motorola flip phone or maybe a BlackBerry, because the iPhone and Android didn't exist yet. And Mark Zuckerberg was still a student at Harvard working on the Facebook. Social media was dominated by MySpace and Orkut. The web was basically static HTML, and you were probably using Microsoft's Internet Explorer as your web browser, though the cool kids were starting to use Mozilla's Firefox. You were definitely using Microsoft Office. And if you were working with anyone else, you were constantly emailing Word and PowerPoint files to each other and dealing with version control hell, where the edits in the files emailed back had to be merged by someone, and that someone was probably you. Meanwhile, at Google had roughly 100 million monthly active search users, or about a 50th of what it is today at 5 billion active users. Gmail had launched a year before on April Fool's Day, offering an outrageous gigabyte of storage, and was still invitation only. Google had also acquired Keyhole and had just launched Google Maps as the first high-profile version of a completely new style of programming called AJAX, or asynchronous JavaScript and XML, that took the web from static to interactive and beautiful, the kind of experience that made you go, whoa, the first time you used it, at least compared to MapQuest. Google was also thinking about the next areas where it could innovate and grow under its 70-20-10 resource allocation model. Salar Kamagar, who was employee number 9, original product manager for Google Ads, and my office mate, and I were tasked by Eric Schmidt with running Google's first ever strategy process. As part of it, we pitched that Google should have a coherent set of products centered on what we called CCC, communication, collaboration, and community, with the fairly obvious insight that there had to be a better way for people to collaborate than dealing with emailed file version hell. And it seemed odd that the 100% market share product for creation and collaboration, namely Microsoft Office, was architected before the internet existed and still basically ignored that the internet existed. In parallel, a group of super smart and ambitious friends with just the right combination of insight, brilliance, passion, and irreverence, i.e. Sam, Claudia, and Steve, the upstartle team and creators of Rightly, along with Jen Mazzone, were thinking very similar things. And from our first discussions with Sam, it was clear that they were a special team with the right experience and drive to do great things, but they could also be the core of what I've called seed crystals at Google, which were acquisitions of small but mighty teams that could grow into much more. Other early examples of the seed crystal approach were Keyhole and Urchin, which became Google Analytics, and after Rightly, the other major components of the Google suite, two web technologies that became Google Sheets and Zinter, Google Slides. Even later, you could probably see the same of YouTube. But first, we had to get the Rightly team on board. Sam was a tough negotiator and didn't make it easy. And we knew they were being chased by VCs to invest and other web companies for acquisition. I shared at one point with Sam that the acquisition price made me queasy. But given the team and the potential was so great, and they were the cornerstone of our CCC strategy, I overcame my indigestion, and thankfully, we made it happen. And thanks to Steve's hard work in porting Rightly from C# into Google's infrastructure, I quickly knew we had captured lightning in a bottle, because when we silently launched inside Google, organic use just exploded. It was instantly adopted for any and all collaborative documents like PRDs, product requirements documents, and engineering design docs. And after launching Google Docs to the world in record time, thanks to some creative corner cutting on operations requirements by Sam, the core Rightly team also became great leaders in helping build and integrate the rest of the CCC suite and figuring out really tricky cross-cutting problems like a consistent sharing model across apps, which seems obvious and is widely copied now, but had to be figured out from first principles by the pioneers. And from the seed crystal that was Rightly, Google Docs and Google Workspace more broadly now serves over 3 billion users around the world. Through their inspiration and hard work, Sam, Claudia, and Steve created a better way for how we collaborate that is now so good and so ubiquitous that we take it for granted. But it's important to remember, and now you know, and I know, and we know, it wouldn't have happened without them. So to conclude, I'll paraphrase a famous-ish and wholly appropriate quote. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. They're the ones who push the human race forward. Thank you, Sam, Claudia, and Steve, for pushing us forward and creating the future we now enjoy.
All right. Thanks very much to Jeff for giving us that little bit of history. And now, obviously, you guys have the very firsthand view of that history. I'm not sure what order you want to go in, but can you first just each introduce what role you played on this historic team and how you came together and how you came to share a view of the problem you were trying to solve? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the missing pieces that arrived on the scene that made you see that a solution was possible. Who wants to start?
Who wants to go? Yeah, Sam, maybe you want to start in with because it was a few things that clicked together in your head that was the original idea.
Sure. Yeah, and Tim asked about 4 questions, and so let me start what the role is. I was sort of the weirdo of the bunch. I mostly did front end stuff at the time. Steve and Claudia did much better engineering than me. I was sort of the mad scientist experimenter, as you can kind of hear from what Jeff was saying. So Rightly actually originally was a nice happy accident. It was, we were working on a startup together. We had met at Intuit before that and had worked at Intuit for a little while. And then we dropped out to do a startup. And we didn't really know what we wanted to do. So we're kind of playing around with various things. I think one of the ideas was a distributed bug database was kind of the current thing we were working on. And one afternoon, I just, noticed what was then called JSON, which was JavaScript in the browser, which seemed like an interesting thing to work on. And then also came across what was called content editable at the time. So the browser would let you do a little bit of editing. And the team had a lot of word processing experience. And so it seemed like not too far a stretch to just say, well, let's try to go build a word processor with some of these pieces in the browser. That seemed like kind of a fun thing to do. So that was like the kernel of the idea as I remember it. And then what I remember two things happened. Well, I remember a whole bunch of stuff around that. One was like Steve and Claudia both immediately told me, this was, a bad idea, which probably was. Like the browser probably wasn't as ready as we thought it was. And then I think the other thing that happened was it felt like a good idea. It's almost as soon as we got it up and running. And then we immediately started stepping on each other's edits. And so we quickly realized we had to go do the hard problem of collaboration, which was really Steve's accomplishment more than anything else. So I was just the front end JavaScript monkey, but Steve and Claudia were the folks that actually built the meat of it. So that's where it started, I think.
Okay, so what came next, Steve or Claudia?
Yeah, well, so yeah, I mean, as I remember it, I mean, Sam, you had some pitch you were like, you had four things you were pointing at, and I can never remember all of them. One was you would talk about Napster, like, FTP had been around forever. This is just FTP, except it's easier to use. And
right.
And then and Gmail, everybody remembers the 1 gigabyte, but the other thing about Gmail is you could do bold and italic in the message editor, which was, Hotmail, everything else before that didn't. So like Gmail was the first thing that showed you could do rich editing in the browser, which was that content editable. So you pointed to those two things and a couple others I forget, and you like added it up and got pretty much the concept for Rightly, and which was just word processing in the browser. And yeah, I guess my role was basically backend, and Sam is really being too self-deprecating, and like he was. I think the short version is Claudia did the front end, I did the back end, and Sam did everything. And he was just like hopping around making it all work, and like giving us pokes when we were being like too stuck on trying to like go down the wrong road or be too perfectionist about something. But yeah, so I was building the back end, and I cannot overemphasize how no idea what we were doing we were. We had never built server software before. All we had ever done was desktop software. And we built this as a desktop app. It just happened that desktop was in a data center somewhere in Texas. But the way the code was structured, the way we were managing the data, there was no, at the time, everything was, it was the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, Perl. We didn't use any of that. This was written in Microsoft Windows and like stored everything in one big file like you would do if you're writing a desktop app. And so that bad idea was my part of the project. And then it was just this journey of, that works fine when it was the three of us playing around with it. And then as we started getting users and it started scaling up and everything was all on one computer with no database, trying to keep ahead of the consequences of that bad decision was my role.
I think I always draw a lot of lessons from the early days of this, and there's like two lessons in here already that I want to talk about, like, if you don't mind. One is just that like it was a cheap enough experiment that this crazy weird novel idea was like doable, that like the team would actually go do it. I do remember like Claudia in particular was like, "You're nuts, like this is never going to work as a user experience." And I think that was like actually not wrong at the time. It turned out to be less not wrong as the browsers got better, but a crazy idea. But like having the ability to do something that, as a fast experiment is always like super, super valuable. And then I think what Steve just said is like super important, of like, usually when like interesting things are happening, the people doing them don't actually know how to do them at the time, right? Like you kind of learn by doing. And I think that's true a lot of like the AI stuff that's going on today too, where like people don't really know how to build effectively with AI yet. We're learning, people are getting better at it very quickly. But like, I always tell people, like, if you wait until it's obvious and easy, it's too late, because then everyone can do it. The best time to do stuff is when it's like really messy and unknown, just like Steve described.
Yeah, that's great. So Claudia, you kind of then obviously put together a lot of pieces that made this magical user experience.
Okay, so to be clear, Sam did a lot of the front end code with me. He was a jack of all trades. He would talk to Steve about the craziness of syncing, data syncing, as well as work on the front end. I kind of viewed my role at the time as demartianing things. Because so I had a baby. I come back and would see what these two were building, because we had left Intuit at this point, and they had this thing called Notekeeper. And I took one look at it, and it was like, what the heck? And they were playing with this idea of sharing notes across email, and it was just it was completely Martian. That was the phrase I always used when these guys would come up with something. Okay, that's not commercially viable. Consumers are not going to get this. And then one day Sam came in. We were in that room behind Steve right there. Only there was a huge pool table and lots of Lego. And so Sam came back from this lunch with a guy that he had been bouncing ideas off of. And he's like, you know what we could do? And he talked about content editable and JSON and all that stuff. And we wrote it up on the whiteboard. You reminded me, Steve, when you said Napster. You wrote Dockster. That was the name of it. DOCSTER. And we called it Dockster internally for the longest time until I finally came up with the URL of Writely, which in the UK, they still call Writerly. I have no idea why. But yeah, so that was my role.
And I think that was a typo, wasn't it? Wasn't it Writely a typo? We were like looking for domains and like.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a typo. It was one of the very first LY things. And every time I see another LY, I'm like, oh dear God. I was obsessed, right? I was obsessed over the domain. So
I just remember I did a lot of brainstorming on names, and the one I kept trying to pitch you guys on was Sky Paper.
Yes, I remember Sky Paper. I was convinced it had to be a word with an end, a word people could spell with an ending. Still didn't work in the UK, but I tried.
So one of the things that I'm kind of trying to get after here is this sense that, people have, and I just came up recently, somebody was talking about how fast, they're talking about AI is going so fast, and they forget that, like, for example, it's like, look, the adoption of ChatGPT is the fastest in history. And I go, well, where do you start that fastest? Do you start with the release of ChatGPT? Do you start with the release of the Transformers paper? So that's a difference of it's 2 years or it's 8 years, and there's this progress of technology where we learn from each other and we see something, this it really is fundamentally innovation is fundamentally a collaborative process. You guys talked about how you suddenly saw this new piece that somebody else had done for a different purpose, and you said, oh, we could use it to solve our problem. So I guess when I'm thinking about where we are today, what are the pieces that you might see lying around? And what are the problems that you see that still need to be solved? And I think, Steve, you wrote a piece about all the parts of the collaboration problem that Google Docs didn't solve, for example. And both Sam and I have written some things about how AI doesn't really have a collaborative environment other than leaning on GitHub, and Google Docs for that matter. Although there may be some beginnings towards it. And Claudia, like, it seems to me that there's a huge amount of the rethinking of what's possible with AI is no longer in better model. It's in product. It's in better user interface. It's in realizing that you can solve a new problem in a different way by putting these pieces together differently. So are there any areas where you kind of are currently engaged with this, or think that people ought to be engaged or could be engaged?
Is that to me or to all of us?
Yeah, any of you, really, whoever
Steve's
has.
Probably more up on this than I am. I have my opinions, but I'll let Steve do the professional version. You want to hear my opinion?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, AI is both the coolest thing I've ever seen and terrifying. Not because I'm worried that it's going to take over, Skynet, and then, we're all dead. Not like that, but just because of the negative potential. There's lots of bad things that can come with what we call AI, which is not AI. It's just a large language model on top of training data and all this other stuff, training rules and data. And now it's in my Illustrator and in my Photoshop and in my Google Docs and Gmail. It's everywhere. I'm like, get Gemini, stop it. I just feel like it's being shoved down my throat. And so I'm like, push it away instead of using it something collaborative. And what I might have mentioned before is that for me, I want AI to make my life easier. And that's the agent stuff people talk about, but that's all still very siloed little, here's an agent. Chatbot, that kind of a siloed approach. To see it actually get in there and help me communicate and collaborate with others, there's a lot that can be done there because that stuff is still broken, in my opinion. It's just so manual. Steve, you had an interesting story about a guy that was collecting documents as a full-time Google Docs at the White House.
Oh, yeah. Someone I know who was recently did a stint at the White House. But as I understand it, he was basically the guy at the keyboard for drafting the AI policy. And so he was getting input from, every other agency and everyone else, and whatever. And he posted on Twitter, "I am become human Google Doc, merger of interagency feedback." Because I guess they weren't there's all kinds of security rules, and I don't know what else within the federal government, within the White House, and they weren't allowed to use Google Docs. So he was having to manually merge, everybody would do their markups of this huge, complicated document, and he would merge it back together. But, even, a process like that, even when you can use Google Docs, that's a big help, but it doesn't solve the problem. Because, I think, we've all seen, you've got the doc and you've got the comments on the doc and you've got the hallway conversation about the doc and you've got the email thread about the doc. And then you've got the new doc that's the next stage of the project or the other half of the project, that you've got the other related doc and everything. And then you've got your project tracker with the to-dos that came out of the doc and all those things still, Google Docs unify kind of one piece of that puzzle, but there's still 9 other pieces. And yeah, this still really seems to be an unsolved problem. I think it's like any collaborative project, you've got the output, the document or whatever, but you've got also the process of people talking and thinking things through and communicating. And a process and a document, and an output are not, they're just completely incompatible structures. And, a doc with comments solves a little bit of that, but leaves a lot of the pieces. And I think this is, I remember a year maybe after the Google acquisition, and we got a demo of Google Wave, and it was a document editor and a chat tool and an email client, but they were all the same thing, and you could see each other, not only see each other typing in the doc live, but you could see if somebody was sending you an email message, you could see the email message coming up in your inbox as they were typing it. And it sort of felt like it was trying to be that be all and end all and bridge all that. And then it just kind of collapsed under its own weight and never went anywhere. I remember being both excited and jealous at the time. I felt like they had, cracked the next step that we hadn't, and then kind of didn't happen.
So I want to go back to something that Claudia said, which is this feeling that you have that AI is being pushed at us all the time. And obviously you had this experience, as did, Sam and team at OpenAI, of just building a product and having it take off because it filled a hole that was waiting to be filled. And I guess I don't know what we can do about it, but there's it seems to me there's this kind of blind foolishness that where all these people were trained in the social media era of trying to get people addicted and basically all this attempt to force people to use the product. And boy, if we could just remember that a great product sells itself. If it solves a user problem, then you don't have to basically be shoving it in people's face.
Okay, but that said, I have to say the first real use of Writely, this is going back, so it's not AI, but it's Writely, is my brother was he was at a business school in Madison, Wisconsin, And he had this class and he tortured them by making them do the entire semester using Greatly. And it was not ready for prime time at all. And I wish I still had the things they wrote up. I think they wrote them in Word. Because they were like, this thing is terrible. It'll never work. Nobody wants this. It's horrible. You're solving a problem that doesn't exist. It was just endless. Of course, we ignored it all. And my brother was like, just ignore him. Well, they were like emailing his dean to say, we want him fired. He's like, it was that strong of this thing was being pushed at them. It was really helpful to us, though, to see how that all went. And that attitude was so important for us to understand.
Yeah,
and we used it.
Yeah, I think that's a little different of like getting people to change their expectations and to try something. I think is a very useful use of AI. You know, you read someone like Ethan Mollick, he's talking all the time about how you get corporate adoption and how you have to encourage people to try it all the time and be exploring. But I think exploring a new technology is different than the self-serving goal of a company to make you use it, even when you don't want it. You know, a lot of today feels a lot more like Microsoft Bob than it feels like, really great.
Nasty. I think what Claudia is talking about, that reaction, like I talk about that a whole bunch in the stuff that I've written. And like, I think that's a natural reaction when something's really disruptive and challenging to your worldview. I think that's true of AI, and I think it was true of the collaborative docs and the cloud stuff and all that, where like you get this love it or hate it bifurcation and very little in between. Like there are people who just totally get it. You know, your writer, Nate Tarkington, was like one of our early champions. He actually like got it faster than we did and loved it. And we were like surprised at how strong his reaction was. I remember how much of a supporter he was. And then I remember all kinds of people had the same reaction that Claudia had for various reasons. They would always make up these, what I would call these like why not stories, like why this thing had to fail. Like, and it just always felt like it was really rooted in emotion more than anything really rational. I think you see a lot of that with like almost anything that's new and really disruptive. I really feel like there's a ton of echoes of that in the AI moment that we're in right now. Yeah, to be honest.
No, I think that's right. Hey, there's a question here from JR who says, Git was released in 2005. You solved a similar problem with distributed versioning for human readable docs rather than code. But what's the odds you could have done Google Docs for code?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a different problem. To some, I'm like, you don't care quite as much about pixel level versioning and merging, or character level versioning and merging for writing as you do for code, right? Like it's just like a very different regime. So.
Well, it's also
Steve
very
would love to do that.
Different set of user experience and knowledge. I mean, Git, took the world by storm, but it was not as a paradigm. It's not fundamentally different from, SCCS or RCS or any of the things that went before. It's got manual check-ins. As opposed to one of the things that you guys did that was truly remarkable. And I think, Claudia, you mentioned this when we were chatting beforehand. Maybe you could talk about that insight you had.
About what?
Control S.
Oh, yeah. Control S. Yeah, because so one of the things that we would do is, because you're so trained, the fingers just want to do what they're going to do. Control S or Command S in Word, right? You got to save the document. And the idea that it was getting saved was brand new in the cloud. That was just like, what? That is impossible. And I did a podcast that was entirely about this, the fact that we had made this choice to autosave. And frankly, from our perspective, it's because can and because better, right? But we had to train the audience and we had to tell them, we're saving it, we're saving it, we're saving it. And you Command S and we would just eat it. It would all work beautifully. It was a huge paradigm shift for everyone for the browser-based stuff. Because even with Gmail, it's still buttons, save, send, and that was just gone in Writely.
Yeah, I think
Didn't we have like a dummy save button at one point?
We
Didn't
did.
we have like a save button that we did, didn't we? Like I'm not imagining that.
Very early on we did, and then eventually we got rid of it. It was next to the beta meter.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you didn't. People so desperately felt the need to save, even though they didn't need to save because we were auto saving. That we finally had to give them the button.
Yeah, it is. But that seamlessness and that realization that like there's a way that you made version control invisible in a way that nobody else ever did, and it makes me think a lot about as I interact with AI, just how the experience is still so unfinished in that way. Like you go, okay, I think about. I'm at a particular point in a chat and you go down a path and the results are getting worse. It's kind of hard to revert. It's kind of hard to see your previous versions. It's hard to branch. All these version control problems that were, that are quite familiar to software developers are still not solved for AI. And they're even less solved for users who are non-technical. Because developers can rely on Git rather for as the infrastructure of that kind of reversion and version control. Whereas if you're just a non-technical user, you need something like the invisibility that you built. Do you have any advice for the AI platforms out there about what they might do? They learn from your lessons, what lessons they might learn from your work?
I mean, I think, well, I have plenty, but I just think first of all, people are lazy. And I think that's product designers always forget how lazy human beings are. And you always want to be, you make things as easy for everybody, for your user as possible. People don't use your stuff because they like you. They use your stuff because it makes their life better. And so I think being ruthless about that is really important. And I think, and that kind of goes with the second thing, which is, I think most software people are, to use Claudia's phrase, essentially Martian, and don't really have that sensitivity to what is easy and hard for normal people. We deal with abstraction very well in the computer industry, and normal humans don't really. And so I think it's very easy to make something that feels easy, it's just do a pull request, no problem. It's really easy. Just type this command line thing that seems natural, and it's not for normal people. So I think being ruthless about understanding what really is easy for somebody and where the friction points are and how to just kind of go do that hard stuff. That the stuff you're talking about, with all the version control, whatever, Steve is now the person who's being modest about this. That was brutal to do, right? That actually getting it to work where you could just sit down in front of think about it for a second. If browsers talk about the document in different languages, the DOMs are not standardized. You can say, they're not even the same tree sometimes. You have an empty paragraph that's a singleton BR tag or a open closed P tag. The attributes of a tag aren't in the same order. That's unspecified. They can be capitalized or not capitalized. You have to normalize all that stuff just to be able to think about what the merge is to produce those revisions. That's a really hard problem. And most engineering teams and product design teams would look at that problem and be whatever, just lock it and unlock it. It's easier. I don't want to deal with that. And we just didn't love it. Claudia held our feet to the fire. We held our feet to the fire. We wanted this thing to just actually work without having to think about it. And I think that's the kind of the key insight is getting down to that level of people are lazy. We're going to be ruthless. We're going to suffer hard on this problem that is unreasonable to make this thing work the way it ought to work is the core of doing good product design, whether it's AI or anything else. I think that's my core takeaway from that.
Yeah, and I think we're in such a period of change right now with AI has opened up this vast space of things it seems like you could do. I bet I could build a product that does X with AI, but we don't quite know how to do it, or the AI, or the models aren't quite reliable enough or whatever. So people are still figuring out what's the relationship between like the sort of seemingly possible and the thing that you can actually do reliably. So something I think someone once said to me, like when you're designing a product, you have to check one of two boxes. It has to be completely understandable to the user, so they always understand what it's doing and why, you know, when it will work and not work. Or it has to be magic and work perfectly every time. And if it works perfectly every time, the user doesn't have to understand it. Like, you know, I need to know which Wi-Fi network to connect my phone to, but I understand Wi-Fi networks. It's that box in my living room. I don't need to tell my phone which cell tower to connect to. But if my phone didn't do a perfect job of connecting to the right cell tower, and if it didn't do a perfect job and I didn't understand it, which I don't know where the cell towers are, like that wouldn't work. You have to do one or the other. And right now in AI, like nobody understands any of it, but we haven't figured out how to make like the product designs that can actually work magically.
That really makes sense. So what do you find irritating, missing, in your experience of AI, and particularly when I think about the popularity of this idea that we'd be able to vibe code our way to the future. Seems to me that vibe coding will bring you back. It can help you build things that already exist, but it's not so good for helping you, solve these hard problems in a new way. Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I don't know. That sounds like a why not story to me, to be honest. Like, I think we want vibe coding to not work, as people have been making our living on a certain kind of coding for a long time. I think it's going to be more effective than we think. We don't forget the models are going to get better. So what's being dismissed today as crappy will be perfectly fine later. I mean, we heard kind of similar things about JavaScript in the early days. We're like, you can't build a real app with JavaScript because it's not a real language and the browser is not a real environment, all this other stuff. So like, that's not the part I'm trying to push on.
I'm really more like the thought process that makes you say, like if you're sort of thinking about these hard problems that you were trying to solve before.
Well, I think
that still exists.
And maybe it's an interesting dynamic though. Like, it's hard to know how this is going to play out. Like, on the one hand, sure, like vibe coding maybe is less sophisticated. On the other hand, like now you have way more people who are able to do any kind of coding at all. So like there's more creativity being applied to these things. You will find more solutions. And sometimes like I have really good engineers on some of my teams at Microsoft who are using these tools in a very different way than vibe coding, where they're building really complicated things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. I don't know. I don't know that it's that simple. In code, yeah. Like building really like these. I have an engineer right now who I think he's spending $2,000 a day on or roughly the equivalent on like API costs, on inference costs. Like, he's probably like literally 10 or 15 people worth of engineer right now. It's crazy, like the people who can really do this stuff. So like
I think we're in violent agreement. I guess all I'm saying is that it's not like the stuff happens by magic. Somebody has to really do the hard thinking.
Oh yeah,
and push the tool to solve the hard problem.
Well, but that's because, in my opinion, what everyone keeps doing is saying we need to add AI to our product. Marketing says we need to add AI to our product, or whatever, our school or yet a university. It's just that's what people are doing now, which is what they always do, right? Like, we shipped out CD-ROMs at Intuit that had all sorts of like music and animations and stuff at one point because CD-ROMs were cool. And it's always that way. We're just at that point because it's really not bolt AI onto my product. It's what were we trying to do that we just couldn't even think about doing that AI lets us do now. And there's some, patterns. That's what they should be doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. Like, because that is absolutely what's going on. And I think that absolutely was going on with the internet at the time too. People are like, I got to get me some internet in my product. And I think what Rightly was, in a lot of ways, was native to the internet. Like, it was a product that could not exist without the internet. It wasn't like add some internet to the Rightly. It was like, that's the only way it can exist. I think that's the place to look.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be, it's all the use. a lot of AI right now is let's take everything everyone was already doing and figure out how to make it like 10% easy, 10% automated, 10% faster, or 10% snazzier in some ill-advised way. And the interesting use cases are going to be just the completely different things. And I think, a lot of the limitation is, what would I want to use an AI for? Like, I don't know, like we're trying to organize something at work and there's like 19 emails flying around, but also we've discussed it on, Discord and 2 other channels. And I want to like pull all that information together. I could probably vibe code something for that today, except the information is in Discord and email and all these other things that aren't easy to get to from my vibe coding app. And like everything, all the like things you'd like AI to help you with touch on all these different parts of your life that are like scattered across, even if it's all electronic, which it might be, it's scattered across all these different systems, and it's just hard to get at the data. If and when the computer use agents really get solid and cost efficient, where the AI can just like go into your browser and like navigate all this stuff on your behalf. And if we can solve the like all the security problems that would go with that, where God forbid somebody trick your AI that has access to everything into doing something you didn't want, that would really unlock. But it's, I think a lot of the interesting next generation applications are going to involve access to this data that we don't have a way of giving the AI access to that right now, or we don't have a safe way. And some people are going to start figuring out the clever 80% solution. Like I don't know what they're going to figure out, but stuff will start to emerge that's out of the box.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's sort of a version of Notebook LM that basically taps these live external data stores, live application data stores, rather than just lets you collect a set of documents. And then you would start to have an environment, where you could, have a conversation with all the conversations you're having, so to speak.
Yeah, we've played with ideas like this, like, a Writely document doesn't really exist if it's not online. And we're starting to build these documents that are, these artifacts are generated by the context and the AI. And I think we're going to start to see documents that don't really exist if they're not in the presence of the AI that created them, kind of in the same way the online documents don't really exist if they're not online. I think that's definitely like, and I also think artifacts are going to become more transient. You're going to start to, like, we have an experimental thing we built where it'll generate like design docs and stuff from all these conversations. And it's kind of magical the way Steve's talking about it, but it's also the instant you do this, you see these design docs as almost pieces of litter because they're these weird static things that are going to be instantly out of date. And so I think that's like, that's coming where you want to make sense.
Yeah. And so this is starting to point in the direction that I'm kind of looking for here, which is this notion of sort of an AI infused collaborative environment, where in fact we are able to have an AI partner in a conversation between a set of humans that is helping all of them at once rather than helping each of them individually. That seems super interesting.
Yeah, I think that's another thing I think people haven't really explored yet, that particular modality of like, this AI thing, and it's got memories and capabilities, but it's, so it's sort of human-ish, but it's also not human in the sense that it can be run in parallel. You can make many copies of it. It can talk to people. There's all kinds of different topologies that you can do with an AI system, just like there are with the internet systems. Like, and I think people haven't really gotten to that yet either, really. Like, in terms of like taking that native affordance and like building something interesting out of it. Like, I don't think people are really thinking beyond what we do today.
I heard one interesting little story the other day. Someone who is an engineer. He recently joined, just say a large, very AI forward tech company, and he said he got in, like he, sat down his first day on the job and was startled to discover that there is zero documentation anywhere in the code. And it turns out the reason is the practice at that company is you just ask the AI, like, what does this function do? What does this file do?
Yeah.
Like, nobody bothers to explain anything because you can just have the AI explain it to you on the fly. like this sort of horrifies me, and I'm not convinced it's a good idea, but also like, you know, kind of I'm the dinosaur now, and certainly I'm not there and I haven't seen it. So like, I don't know whether that's the right evolution. Maybe it is, but like there's gonna be just things that seem really weird if you're like not used to living in an AI infused world.
We do this on one of my teams. It's amazing. It frees up the senior people to actually write code instead of answering questions all the time. It works really well if you have all the context pulled in. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it'd be really interesting too if you know your senior person could have a conversation, you know, could see this conversation and be able, for example, to say, well, actually, how about adding this into it? You know, that's the thing I keep looking for is how do you, you know, update the knowledge of the AI if it's not 100% right. So
Retraining.
This is like,
Retraining on the fly somehow fix this. Yeah,
Well,
agreed.
this is like, I think people are coming to realize this is something we've been writing about and talking about for probably a year and a half now. Like memory is a really huge problem. Like memory is probably as big a problem as cognition. Like, cognition is like, how do you think? And memory is what do you think about? And you need both of those pieces to work really well to have something that's highly capable. And, you know, we only have a little bit of the memory problem solved right now. Like RAG clearly didn't work as well as people hoped it would. There's definitely like much more work to be done in that direction. So yeah, that's like, I think that is the grand challenge now.
Yeah, there's one thing I think about a lot, which is that in a way that there's this whole, there is a sort of a memory space that comes for free with an AI. I really got this once. One of our instructors teaches a course on productivity with AI online, and he talked about one of his examples was, you know, you could say, help me organize my my task list using the Eisenhower four-sided box. Now, I'd never heard of the Eisenhower four-sided box, but the AI clearly knows about it. And he says, now you can say, help me organize it using getting things done. And these well-known concepts, you know, are almost like you know, function calls, you know, and the question is, when is something sufficiently known, you know, by the AI that you can rely on it as just taken for granted? And when is it something that you might need to update? You know, like if I were to ask it, you know, give me a bio of, you know, Sam, Claudia, or Steve, you know, you guys are all, you know, somewhat well known, but it probably would leave some things out, and you might want to be able to sort of somehow update it. And so there's that kind of interesting interface between what can we take for granted as known by the AI. I think Matthew Pritz kind of points out, he says the knowledge of an AI is kind of like Swiss cheese. There's a lot of holes in it. And we have to figure out how we're going to fill those holes.
Well, it's not that different from a person, right? Like if you're working at a company with somebody, there's things that you think everybody at the company knows that are probably 99% right. And then sometimes you know, I think part of the problem is also that, you know, the way we use AI is very transactional. It's very ask a question, get an answer. It's not very iterative the way we are with humans, you know, and to Claudia's point about continually training, like, you know, if I go back and forth with you on something and we disconnect somehow, but we kind of triangulate and work it out, then we remember that and we're better. Like now we have this like common piece of information we've worked out. It's harder to get that to happen with an AI because you have to manage that context and that memory very, very carefully. It doesn't learn the same way. So I think like that kind of iterative, like kind of fumble your way through stuff is missing too. And it makes the problem you're highlighting much more acute, like because everything's more brittle. So I think that's another one too. You know, I have a random thing to talk about about just kind of software if you want, which I think is just kind of interesting in light of the Writely stuff, which is, you know, Writely like was the beginning of like, or kind of in the middle of like this huge shift in software, how software works and how software got sold and was built, right? Like we were kind of part of this SaaS Web 2.0 kind of desktop software. I think there's something similar going on with AI and software right now that's worth thinking about a little bit, just as an echo, where, you know, we now suddenly have software that has marginal cost, which is different. And we have this weird thing going on where engineers don't have the same kind of leverage quite that they used to have, where you hire an engineer, they build something once, and then you sell a lot of it. It's now like you hire this engineer, and then you spend their equivalent salary in inference costs. So now people are more expensive. They're higher leverage, but you don't have, you have marginal cost on serving because you have inference costs. Like, I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think, it's worth contemplating for the folks out there that are like looking at this and thinking about like how they do rightly or how do they do something that's disruptive. Like, the rules of the game have changed. Like, the rules of the game changed for us with Rightly. Like, for many years before Rightly came along, Microsoft was completely dominant because they had this distribution advantage and this feature wall that no one could climb over. And then the internet changed that equation, and then folks like us were able to do stuff like Rightly. I think there's something similar going on in a different direction with AI and with software economics. And so I think that's a thing for folks to think about, is like, what's different now that software costs money to serve and scale, and engineers are expensive in a different way. And, it's easy to build little things, maybe easy to build big things, or maybe harder, who knows? So I think that's a really fascinating topic for folks, and a really interesting echo.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think I just was reading an interesting piece that's not published yet about also the fact that the inference cost can be super variable. You try to. There's a lot of things that are cheap to do, and some things that are hard suddenly are cost. So it's sort of not only not zero cost; it's unpredictable cost sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, for innovating along this, if I were doing products these days, it would, for me, I would make a list of what are the things that AI does. Like, if I was trying to come up with a new product capturing this, because, you get a boost in the market if you're using the nice buzzword AI. For me, it's like list processing, abstracting things. There's certain things it does super well. You can make a list of those. Okay, what can I do in my, I don't know, home building business space or something like that, whatever the application is. And then you make a list of things it doesn't do great. And then can we paper over those? Can we innovate there? Right? Because I think it's always comes from the use cases. Of course, that's my perspective. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get done? Because Rightly didn't exist in a vacuum. Rightly was all about getting this document out there. And at one point, we actually viewed it as an HTML editor, partly because it was. But it's about the applications. And we're just on the upside down. We're at CD-ROMs. We're distributing CD-ROMs with AI now. It's just not even, to me. It's just a tool that's kind of awkward, super cool, and awkward at the same time.
Yeah. Hey, we have a question from HM, and he says, Steve, what have you learned so far from starting Golden Gate AI? And how do you think great collaborative tools or practices might help what you're trying to do?
Boy, well, there's an I'm glad you asked that question, if ever there was one. But so just briefly for context, the Golden Gate Institute for AI is this nonprofit I've just co-founded, where we're trying to help advance the conversation on a lot of the big questions around AI. How quickly is this moving? What's the impact going to be for the world? What should we do about it? And the role we're trying to play is just, there's a lot of people there's AI researchers and economists and all these different people from different fields already diving into this, and we're just trying to make more connections and help cross-pollinate and get people from different fields and subcultures talking to each other more. And the big learning has been there's a lot of appetite for this. We'll organize an event and get completely oversubscribed with people who want to attend, or just go around talking to people and oh, that's you should do this. Everybody has 9 ideas for what we should do in this general direction of building the bridges. So I think the learning has been just there is a lot. I think everyone knows they're sort of fumbling in the dark, or they can only see their corner of this rapidly evolving picture. And I'm not sure how many different metaphors I just shoved in 8 words, but so that's been interesting. And right now we're doing this all completely manually, either literally getting people in a room physically together, or doing some kind of online collaboration, in Google Docs, but otherwise sort of completely by hand. And I do think there's a lot of interesting room to get AI in here. We haven't tried to scratch that at all. I can't remember any detail. There's nothing specific I can remember to point to, but there are various other groups out there who are doing experiments in this direction, bringing AI mediated conversations, or using AIs to aggregate kind of large scale group group chats or message boards or things. Like trying to, I do think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen there. One of AI's great strengths today is whatever it can do a million of. So if you've got something that's just too much to deal with, too many message threads, too many different people discussing on too many different corners of the internet, whatever, no person can sort of wrangle all of that. But an AI definitely can if we can just find the right structure for it and as the models keep improving.
So HM also asked a question much earlier, which is abstracting from technical details. How did you or would you decide that X is a problem worth investing years in? And obviously, worth to a lot of people means I can make a ton of money, but I think for a lot of inventors, it also means this is a problem worth solving. Do you have any final thoughts on that?
I'm just going to inject. How badly does X piss you off?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. It's like, how bad is the problem and how big is the market? I kind of object a little bit to the word years. Like, I think the right thing to do is try to figure out, like, can you answer part of the problem with, cheap experiments? Like, make it easier to chip away at sometimes. But yeah, if you're going to spend a lot of time.
We had a 3 month, if we couldn't launch it in 3 months, that was our measure back then. And we did. It was crap, but we got it out there and we could start measuring it and fixing it and finding out the real problems. Yeah, I object to years too.
Yeah. Something that always shocks people is from the day Sam walked into this room with the nutty idea to the day we closed the acquisition with Google was less than 12 months.
Yeah, it was pretty fast. So I think that's important.
That's a great reminder and a great place to start. Actually, it's funny. I was going to say a great place to finish, but I said a great place to start. So I guess that's for everybody else out there. This is a great place to start trying to solve some new problems. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. This has been fun.